Welcome back to the final video in the airport series for what I think is the most interesting airport to discuss, Ontario International. LA's third busiest airport actually still hasn't come back from its pre-Great Recession high water mark of 7.2 million passengers per year, but it's closing in, clawing its way back to 6.4 million last year. Unlike Burbank, Long Beach, and John Wayne, Ontario is not hindered by severe noise restrictions, and it's on a massive footprint compared to those others. You can see that it wouldn't really be all that difficult, all things considered, to add pretty much as much terminal space as they could ever want or need. Plus, its runway can handle large aircraft. Plus, it's by far the least busy runway situation among the area airports, with little more than a third of aircraft movements per runway per year of LAX. So even if Ontario expands to the absolute peak of what it could expect, it actually may not ever need a third runway, especially if it's international traffic, where there's the biggest room for growth, sticks to larger planes, as international transoceanic flights almost always do. I mean, Heathrow somehow operates with only 2 runways, so it can be done. So it has the conditions for future expansion. What about demand? Well, its current collection of routes contains few enough short-haul flights that it won't be obliterated by high-speed rail, which I should add, like Burbank, will have a future station at this airport. So that helps, but let's zoom out to the whole metro area for a second. Here's a very rough approximation of which airport you're closest to from any area in the region. Obviously, this won't actually add up to equidistant travel times between the airports, but it's a, again, very rough approximation. Ontario's region, geographically, is huge. The very, very rough population of this area is 4.3 million. Burbank's, if you want to include that to the line where SBA takes over, is something like 3.6 million. LAX's is like 3.3 million, Long Beach's is like 2.3, and John Wayne's is something like 2.8. According to one article, when you expand that out past the LA metro area, the number of people in SoCal for whom Ontario is the closest airport, well, crucially this metric specifies those who live or work closest to the airport, which obviously changes the calculation a bit, is 10 million. It has the largest catchment area population by far. And it's in a rapidly growing part of the region. And, even more crucially, it's the furthest airport from LAX. It checks literally all of the boxes on being able to maybe not challenge LAX, but to increase its share of the LA region's passenger traffic by a considerable margin, and take the overflow from the other 4 airports when, after the current expansion program at LAX is done, none of those airports can expand anymore and they hit their capacity ceilings. And those at Ontario Airport see that potential and are aggressively pursuing it. While the airport in the Inland Empire as a whole had a very rough time during the recession, for the past 7 years, COVID notwithstanding, after a new local airport authority took control of the airport from Los Angeles World Airports, it's been steadily regaining its lost traffic and pitching itself as an up-and-coming powerhouse. One prediction has Ontario's passenger traffic eventually reaching 30 million down the line, almost 5 times its current traffic, and almost exactly 2/5 of LAX's current numbers. If you remember that comparison from the LAX video, that starts to look like serious alternative second airport energy. And for reference, if it magically had those numbers today, well, in 2022, which is when this data is from, it would be the 19th busiest airport in the US, just ahead of LaGuardia. So, among other things, that projection merits really solid transit access once it reaches that point in the future, just like LaGuardia probably does now. But we'll come back to transit. ONT is also apparently already the Inland Empire's single greatest economic driver. Worth mentioning here that Ontario is a huge destination for cargo aircraft. So, simply put, this airport has potential. And to help it realize that potential, I just want to throw in real quick, I think it should be renamed. You hear me out. Branding matters. You want out-of-towners to see this as a viable option for the Los Angeles area, and Ontario actively hurts because, well, out-of-towners think Ontario, Canada. San Bernardino Airport is already in use and doesn't get us very far anyway. Inland Empire Airport is better, but doesn't really roll off the tongue. Imperial Airport sounds better, but that makes it sound like the Imperial County Airport. And as a side note, I think it's really interesting that the etymologies of the Inland Empire and Imperial County, from which, among other things, Imperial Highway in LA gets its name, are totally different. The Inland Empire comes from the older name Orange Empire, while Imperial County derives from Imperial Valley, which is named after the Imperial Land Company. So despite Imperial being the adjective form of empire, when people in SoCal hear Imperial, they think Imperial Valley or County instead of the Inland Empire. But I say, screw that, because Imperial Airport sounds better and the Inland Empire should reclaim the name. I mean, it would be a very imperial thing to do. I think the solution, which people in the area will probably hate, is just to append Los Angeles to the front of it again and make it Los Angeles Imperial Airport. LA Imperial. It sounds better, and there's a lot of precedence for having the LA name, even though it's not in LA. In Hollywood Burbank Airport isn't in Hollywood, and all of London's airports start with London, and you're not about to tell me that frickin' Luton or Stansted are in London. You can get away with just the local city name with something like San Jose or Oakland, because everyone knows those are in the Bay Area, but not with these smaller cities. I think, inane though it may sound, this could really help it attract traffic and feel like the second major airport in Los Angeles. Okay, back to the airport itself. What's the passenger experience like? Well, as I mentioned in the last video, I can't speak to that personally, but something I find super interesting is that they apparently have a program for non-travelers to get a pass to go through security into the terminal, something that hasn't been allowed in most of the US since pre-9/11 days. Currently, there's 2 terminals totaling 26 gates, along with an international arrivals facility with 2 arrival-only gates, making Ontario already the airport with the second largest number of gates outside of LAX in the region. And right now, they're in the planning stages for a new international terminal in the space between the 2 terminals, which is expected to dramatically increase traffic, especially with flights to China and Japan. There's a huge international community in the San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire, so flights to certain international destinations should be particularly attractive options for people traveling out of the country to see family or friends, and represents a huge potential area for growth. There's no timeline for this yet, but it's safe to say it'll probably happen before too long. There's also space intentionally left for an eventual 4th terminal as well, when designing the current airport layout. So, as you can see, the path to 50 gates or more is free and clear as demand increases. But one issue right now potentially depressing demand is the fact that the east-west freeways of the Inland Empire are often pretty brutally congested, and there's no rapid transit service to the airport at the moment. So let's tackle that by going deep down the rabbit hole of transit. Buckle up. I mean, you can see how much of the video is left. There will be some bonus aviation stuff at the end, but hey, this will at least be fun for me. Now, let's start with our goal. We want reliable, high-frequency transit links connecting to the major population centers and corridors within Ontario's primary catchment area. We'll call the borders the mountains and the San Gabriel River for the sake of simplicity. And then we want reliable express service to major transit centers outside of the catchment area to bring even more people in as an alternative to LAX. In the catchment area, we specifically want reliable, fast, and high-frequency service connecting to the San Gabriel Valley to the west, ideally even a bit past the catchment area, the Pomona Valley to the immediate west, Corona to the south, Riverside to the southeast, and San Bernardino to the east. This is a big lift. So, that said, let's look at our initial conditions and existing plans. Initial conditions are complicated, which is what makes this all a rather tough nut to crack. This is the graphic we'll be coming back to and updating later, showing walkable station areas, frequency of transit lines via dashing, speed via color, and we'll add some very vague travel time estimates from stations once, some of them actually connect to the airport. Right now, there's a rail corridor immediately abutting the airport, which is fantastic. However, it's primarily a Union Pacific freight route, and the only passenger traffic that travels on it is the 3 times a week Sunset Limited, an Amtrak long-distance line to New Orleans, whose closest stop is in downtown Ontario over here. So, yeah. To the south of the airport, you have a Metrolink Riverside Line station in East Ontario, but the Riverside Line, also traveling almost entirely on Union Pacific tracks, has unbelievably terrible service, and SCORE, Metrolink's capital improvements program, isn't even addressing service on this line because the freight volume here is so high. But it gives you infrequent links to Riverside and Union, as well as some points in the San Gabriel Valley, to a somewhat nearby station, just on a schedule that is also essentially useless for airport service, where timeliness and frequency is, well, pretty important. And let's actually pull back for a second and understand what these two sets of tracks are. So the northern set of tracks is Union Pacific's Alhambra subdivision, where the Sunset Limited runs, and the southern set is Union Pacific's Los Angeles subdivision, where the Riverside line runs. As of 2011 at least, and I believe still now, the tracks generally operate as a sort of one-way loop due to the huge amount of freight traffic on these tracks and the fact that there's a lot of single-track portions. There were some suggestions in 2011 about how to alter this to allow more space for passenger traffic, but we'll come back to that. For now, let's go to the north, where things start to look a little better. You have the Metrolink San Bernardino line with stations at Upland and Rancho Cucamonga, the latter exactly 3 miles away, and service on this line is much better and will increase to minimum 30-minute headways after a score is done. Helping the situation is that these are Metro-owned tracks. But, unfortunately, that set of tracks is the one to the north, not the set of tracks abutting the airport. Still, it will provide good connectivity for parts of the San Gabriel Valley and San Bernardino, but I'd argue that 30-minute headways is still a bit challenging when it comes to airport service, although peak service will presumably be better. There's also the Arrow, a DMU line with 1 hour off-peak headways at 30-minute peak headways that runs from San Bernardino to Redlands, and these tracks also get some Metrolink San Bernardino line trains coming all the way to the end. The LA Metro A line is, of course, building phase I've lost count of the Foothill extension to Pomona, and is still trying to scrounge together the money for phase I've lost count +1 that would hit Claremont and Montclair. And it seems they probably will, and that will likely be under construction before long. Now officially under construction, or pre-construction or something, Brightline West high-speed rail to Vegas will end at Rancho Cucamonga Station, a hair's breadth from the airport. This will have intermediate stops in Hesperia and Apple Valley, and travel time between the very oddly sited Apple Valley Station and Rancho Cucamonga will be 40 minutes, which, if this became accessible to the airport, I can bet will become a popular option to draw in folks from the desert. Being a high-speed rail connection, the tickets will probably go for a premium, but it's such a significantly better option than this area otherwise has that they'll probably pay for it. And then, in the far future of existing plans, technically, you have the San Diego phase of California high-speed rail, all options of which will travel in new tracks on the airport-adjacent right-of-way and include a station here, which will, again, in the distant future, provide that express connection to Union that would allow Ontario to become a real option as an attractive alternative to LAX for people way outside of its catchment area, as an express trip to Union will only take around 18 minutes or so. Again, with a higher ticket cost, presumably, but maybe they could offer a reduced price for Union Ontario Airport shuttle service. The potential for this to be a very reliable express service is good. It will also provide service to at least one intermediate stop between Union and the airport, and then to either some part of San Bernardino or Corona in the other direction. But this is far down the road, and we probably want to first think about other connections that could arrive a bit sooner. Finally, we have the SPX Purple Line, a San Bernardino BRT line that's under construction and opening next year, which will serve the airport traveling from downtown Pomona Station and then to a loop up here. Now, a good place to start is the 2 transit studies that have been done examining Ontario connections. One in 2014, one in 2018. Well, actually before that, there was this 2008 study that looked at a bunch of possible A-line extensions, but following studies mostly assumed that the Metrolink Cucamonga Creek alignment is the winner, so let's start with the 2014 study, which is narrowly focused on serving the airport. It started from 32 proposed alternatives and then narrowed them down to 6 that they studied more closely. Worth noting that they eliminated longer distance connections because, while acknowledging their convenience, they were considered to be too expensive, and they eliminated anything involving the Metrolink Riverside line due to its awful service and the high cost of improving that service. So, what are these 6 alternatives? First, we have 2 options that provide rail access to Rancho Cucamonga along either Turner Hermosa Avenue or Deer Creek and Cucamonga Creek. This would allow some sort of through service eastward in theory, although it's meant to be more of a shuttle service. The third option provides a similar rail connection, but westward to Upland Metrolink Station instead, again allowing through service, but I think principally focused on being a connecting shuttle service. The fourth option is just a bus connection to Rancho Cucamonga Station, which now, years later, is already under construction, is the SPX Purple Line. Fifth is an extension of the Aero DMU service that would serve Rancho Cucamonga and travel down Cleveland Avenue through the Ontario Center. And finally, we have an LA Metro A-line extension that would travel down Cucamonga Creek, assuming that Metro will at least bring it to Montclair on its own. Ultimately, it does conclude that the airport needs to reach 15 to 20 million annual passengers to justify the expenditure of a direct rail connection, and current projections have ONT hitting 15 million in 2040, which, well, remains a ways away. But also only 16 years, which feels super soon actually, especially in rail construction time. Now, before we dip deeper into the numbers on these, I want to look at the options that the 2018 study examined in detail. Now, this study had a different focus, zeroing in on improving connections between LA and San Bernardino counties, so we're going to zoom out a little wider. But as a side effect, it studied pretty much exclusively options that increase service to Ontario Airport. Now, it started with 38 options and also narrowed things down to 6, all of which presuppose the now under construction SPX Purple Line, albeit with an older concept for a second phase added as well, which I'll draw on as a more modern plan of the Mid-Valley Connector going to San Bernardino, but as an extension instead of a separate service. One of the options is the same A-Line Cucamonga Creek option, although adding a conversion of the SPX Purple Line BRT between downtown Pomona and Ontario Airport to rail, with an optional extension to Cal Poly Pomona. The second retains that new LRT and shares those tracks for a new A-line extension as well, reducing the new tracks that would need to be built to this section that branches off prior to Claremont Station. The third is just a BRT option that adds a Haven BRT with some added express bus routes. The fourth option is a hybrid rail route, which seems to mean extending the Aero DMU service all along the San Bernardino line, which has been suggested before, with a jaunt down to Ontario Airport on the Creek route that several of the DMU shuttles used in the 2014 study, with an optional extension to Cal Poly Pomona along the Pomona Rail Corridor that also serves the downtown Pomona station. They could run various service patterns on this three-pronged Aero system. And then we have two distinct phases of the commuter rail alternative. And this is a little more complicated, so I'm going to show these alternatives on a localized diagram map to better see the difference between express and local service, because a lot of these are going to share tracks. So in the first phase, we extend Aero along the San Bernardino line as far as this spot east of the 15, where it'll hop down to Ontario Airport and then to downtown Ontario. Second, we use most of this new right-of-way for a second DMU service that turns west to act as a shuttle to Rancho Cucamonga. Third, we again add a hybrid rail DMU service all along the San Bernardino line, but ending at downtown San Bernardino instead of continuing on to Redlands. This will stop at every station, while Metrolink's regional rail will become more of an express and now stop only at certain stations. And fifth, we add platforms on the Riverside line to downtown Ontario to facilitate a transfer to the DMU services that can take you to the airport. Then Phase 2 presented as a separate alternative. So the first thing we're going to do is immediately abandon that downtown Ontario station on the Riverside line, because we're actually going to divert the Riverside line briefly onto the Alhambra subdivision via new tracks alongside Haven, so it can stop at the airport, killing the East Ontario station, and then immediately return to the LA subdivision afterwards. Second, we're extending the Aero DMU service all the way to the Industry Metrolink station via downtown Pomona and Cal Poly Pomona. Third, we're killing this shuttle route because we're going to build a new Creek shuttle route again that will, in some combination of service patterns on these three prongs, serve the local DMU hybrid rail line, the now Express Metrolink line that has limited stops, and a brand new two-stop only Extra Express service that has 0 intermediate stops between the airport and Union Station. Whew. So for all of these options, we have some concrete numbers, even if they are from 10 and 6 years ago. They were evaluated on somewhat different metrics, so we'll look at them separately. First, the 2014 Airport Connection Study. It finds that BRT is by far the most cost-effective, unsurprisingly, and that the A-Line brings in the most overall ridership, also unsurprisingly. But that, unlike with all the other options where a majority of the passengers are coming from the east, 95% of the passengers on the A-Line extension come from the west. The most surprising points to me are both how expensive an Aero extension is, even before you add in double tracking a few sections of the San Bernardino line to be able to maintain current Metrolink service, and how expensive the shuttle options are relative to the A-Line extension, all more expensive. The A-Line, though, has a much higher annual operating and maintenance cost. Now, moving over to the 2018 study, focused more on the region rather than just airport access, but with separate metrics for both non-passenger and passenger boardings at ONT, we can again see that the A-Line Cucamonga Creek option, albeit also evaluated with an SPX Purple Line partial light rail conversion, also dominates the options, with by far the most new riders overall and airport riders. Interestingly, the vast majority of airport boardings seem to be workers. The estimated cost here is significantly higher, but it also includes that second light rail, and its cost effectiveness is actually rated the best regardless. Other surprises here are just how poorly the other options fare in comparison until you get to the Union Station Express option involved in the commuter rail phase 2, which has significant track capacity concerns and which will also be duplicated by a better version in California High-Speed Rail one day anyway. The 2014 report recommends that a rail shuttle connection to Rancho Cucamonga be explored for the long term after the airport hits 15 million annual passengers, with BRT service in the near term, which again is already under construction. This is recommended over an Aero extension due to cost versus the benefit of a one-seat ride, and over an A-Line extension in the near term, both because this would facilitate access from either direction on the San Bernardino Metrolink line versus primarily the west, and because the A-Line would primarily benefit LA County, while the Rancho Cucamonga Station shuttle would better benefit San Bernardino County, which would be funding it. Meanwhile, the 2018 report did not make a recommendation, as it wasn't the purpose of the study, but it did still rank the alternatives based on 4 broad goals and rated the A-Line Cucamonga Creek option the best. Now, before we consider what conclusions we should draw from this, let's see what the airport and SBCTA have drawn from it. Well, they decided that an A-Line extension, at the time of decision calculated to cost around $1.5 billion, was just too expensive, and that connecting the airport to Rancho Cucamonga Metrolink Station was indeed the way to go, but not by one of the studied shuttle options. In fact, not a rail option at all. No, they decided a Musk tunnel was the way to go. Yes, one of these beauties.
Oh my, there's a traffic jam. Was there often a lot of traffic?
The Boring Company claimed that they could make a 4-mile tunnel to Rancho Cucamonga Station with only $60 million, which sounds really attractive if you ignore the fact that these are idiotic death trap tunnels that take an obvious transit solution, trains, and devolves it to sell more explodey cars in ultra-narrow tunnels. Oh, and also with luggage. Anyway, for reasons probably entirely unrelated to the fact that the Boring Company is a massive scam, they rescinded their proposal, leaving Ontario airport officials hanging. So they next decided to try to find someone to build the exact same crap tunnel concept with quote-unquote autonomous on-demand cars. For a much more realistic $492 million, the new goal is to have this done by the Olympics. In 2022, they expected an EIR by September 2023, but there's been nothing so far. They say it will be, quote, substantially cheaper than a surface rail alternative, which I actually somewhat doubt, and I'll discuss why in a minute. Because of the lack of progress, it seems there is yet time to squash this deeply, deeply stupid idea. It's worth noting that local residents who want some kind of connection are also very skeptical of this idea. Like, why build a low-capacity system with an extremely expensive underground alignment option that doesn't take advantage of the expense of building a fully grade separated exclusive right-of-way by using something high capacity, like a freaking drain? So let's look at what I believe Ontario Airport and SBCTA should do, starting in the near term, while they still have time to save themselves from themselves and this absolutely brain-dead, hideous idea. First, the under-construction BRT is great, and it will help draw in passengers along the rail corridor here especially. It should absolutely be extended to Cal Poly Pomona, as well as Mount San Antonio College. Along Holt, it can use the LA Metro San Gabriel Valley East-West BRT infrastructure that should be built by 2028. Past that, it will remain mixed flow to Mount San Antonio College, but it can share the route. For that matter, that LA Metro BRT should extend east to Ontario Airport via the SPX Purple Line's BRT infrastructure. Now, you have a one-seat ride, albeit still a relatively slow one with a ton of mixed flow, to this area of the San Gabriel Valley. Next, if you want to build what's best for the airport, build the damn A-Line connection. Yes, it's for LA County riders reaching the airport primarily, but It's for them reaching and using the airport in San Bernardino County in much greater numbers than San Bernardino County's own population will use it from connecting transit service in the near term. So it's an economic driver that will allow the airport to grow and expand more quickly, which lifts the whole county. Just build it. Especially if LA Metro is so wildly intent on funding the extension to Montclair. Yes, it will be more expensive, but it will be so much more worth it. And with a station at Upland, it still allows San Bernardino line passengers to connect there in the near term with not that much more time spent, so it still serves a lot of San Bernardino County passengers. Now, the connection to Rancho Cucamonga Station. That should probably not be the first thing to build. Why? First off, while the San Bernardino Metrolink line will seemingly run at 30-minute minimum headways after SCORE, that's still not quite frequent enough to make an effective airport connection service. It's not terrible, it's not like it's the Riverside line, and again, it'll presumably have more frequent trains at peak, but you need consistent, reliable frequency in order to make your flights. There's more that can be done after SCORE to improve this, but at the moment, in 2024, it's running on either 1 hour or 30-minute headways, and I think that makes the connection to Rancho Cucamonga Station and the San Bernardino Metrolink line second to the A line. But still a strong second. Brightline West will be a good connecting service as an express option from the desert, which I do think will be used. So, while I think the A-line connection should absolutely be built first to ONT, if they insist on building the Rancho Cucamonga Station shuttle first, at least it's the second best option, but only if they do it right. Seriously, it's useless if you don't do it right. Their original recommended idea to build this along the creek right-of-way as a grade-separated DMU shuttle is by far the best option, and here's why. First, it's faster and more direct than your tunnel, which, the benefit of a tunnel is supposed to be to take the most direct route, so when you're even losing that benefit by tunneling. Second, obviously, a train is better. Higher capacity, much easier for luggage, much less of a death trap gadget bomb. Third, I don't see how this isn't more cost-effective. It's a shorter above-ground alignment. Yeah, I know rail infrastructure is more expensive, but it's not like you need to build a yard. You can presumably use Arrow's yard, and I think a yard was built into the high costs from the 2014 study. Also, the 2014 study assumes a lot of stations, which is a huge part of the cost. You need tracks and 2 stations worth of platforms. Sorry, actually 1 station worth of platforms, because you're using Rancho Cucamonga's platforms. You don't need any stations in between. The BRT can pick that up. And we only need the rail shuttle to hit an intermodal transit facility because, for now, we can build a pedestrian connection to this terminal, which will, by the time this is all built, hopefully, have an international terminal connecting all of this. Not that you don't want stops at every terminal, but we're going to add an APM later for that. So that knocks off a ton of the cost from the 2014 study, and possibly means the rail connection can be cheaper than the dumbass tunnel, and certainly not substantially more expensive. Fourth, while you don't need to spend the money to extend aero service this far now, this allows aero service to one day reach here with no more new infrastructure needed between Ontario and Rancho Cucamonga Station, which is why we're building this initially as a 2-stop shuttle and not a people mover style train. Looking at the San Bernardino line, the green sections are double-tracked, yellow will be double-tracked by SCORE, and red will for now remain single-tracked. If we double-tracked these 3 sections, then you can run aero on this line without damaging capacity on the San Bernardino line. I'm sure double-tracking that will be expensive, but honestly, to get a 1-seat San Bernardino ride, it's not bad. I don't know if you could get frequent enough service on aero in this section for reliable airport transit, ideally at least every 15 minutes, in addition to Metrolink trains, but if you can, then that remains the best way to serve San Bernardino and points in between with rail to the airport, and balance out the westward focus of the A-line. And funding the more expensive project is worth it in its own right and not just as an airport line, justifying the higher cost. You don't have to build infill stations in between, and certainly not right away, but you can, and that will just improve access to the area. If and when the San Bernardino line is finally frickin' electrified, this can be too, and can be served with EMUs instead of DMUs. Would be tricky to do that from the start though, because I think then you'd need to add a yard as opposed to just using arrows. Oh, and 5th, you can possibly sneak in some infrastructure for a future obvious high-speed rail link between Brightline West and the San Diego high-speed rail. It would need to be a very low-speed link traveling on this connector, but it certainly seems to be the most cost-effective way to get Vegas trains to Union. I know the High Desert Corridor is supposed to allow these trains to reach Union potentially prior to the San Diego high-speed rail getting off the ground, but I don't know, I have my doubts. Both are pretty far off, and the San Diego high-speed rail will be an overall much more crucial project. Now, there is the chance Brightline West could eventually convince Metrolink to electrify the San Bernardino line and run their trains to Union via those tracks before San Diego high-speed rail happens, but there's some challenges that'll make that a big lift, mainly the potential need to double-track some really difficult sections and to electrify the whole thing, obviously. And I think San Diego high-speed rail will eventually lay new tracks anyway, and that Brightline West would just use those tracks once they're there and allow Brightline West trains to run to Union at a much higher speed than they would or will be able to on the San Bernardino line tracks. So we're going to skip ahead to that. Although it would be great if we could get Brightline West Union in the interim. But back to this connector. Because of the narrowness of the straightaway here, I think you will have to have them share tracks. But, I mean, that should be fine. And that also means you could technically serve Ontario Airport with Brightline West from the get-go if you just add an OCS to these tracks and have the necessary platform space at the airport, along with a junction at the start. But hold that thought, I'm going to talk about how to configure the station in a bit. Hopefully, I've convinced you that this shuttle connector is way, way better than the goddamn Musk tunnel idea. Let's collectively consider the under construction SBX Purple Line BRT extended to Mount San Antonio College along the San Gabriel Valley BRT route that should be operational by now, along with an extended version of that BRT to O&T, and then the A-Line extension and this DMU shuttle without Brightline West through trains for now at least, as phase 1 of airport transit. Given the utility of the connection for airport workers, I think it's very justified to do these, especially the A-Line, before Ontario hits 15 million annual passengers. I also think that it'll probably be before 2040, especially if they get that international third terminal built sooner rather than later. Oh, and let's add some BRT lines to phase 1 as well, actually. On the latest SBCTA long-range plan, although I think they're working on another one right now, you've got a ton of BRT routes, but only still the predecessor to the SBX Purple Line connecting to the airport. I don't really understand the logic of operating these as shorter routes as opposed to one longer route. I'm sure there are reasons, but extending the Purple Line along Foothill to San Bernardino, which again is another separate in the works BRT project, the Mid-Valley Connector, would offer a one-seat ride from San Bernardino sooner than an Aero extension would arrive. And I think a BRT route down to Corona, though I don't know what transit agency would operate this, presumably Riverside County's RCTC, seems to make a ton of sense, and even if an express link is ultimately placed here via high-speed rail, this would come far sooner. Remember, we're only looking at new airport connecting services, so ignoring other BRT lines here for now. Okay, so with all that being phase 1, let's pull back to our catchment area and see how much of it we're serving here. Between the BRTs and the A-Line, there's great one-seat ride connectivity for the San Gabriel Valley, as well as San Bernardino with the BRT, and two-seat ride connectivity via the Rancho Cucamonga shuttle to the desert and the whole San Bernardino line corridor. Let's move on to phase 2. I think a landside automated people mover is now justified connecting the transit station to all terminals, leaving room for a fourth if and when they build it, and the rental car facility. And I think extending easily to the convention center nearby on the west end. Now, you could extend this all the way down to the Riverside Line's East Ontario station as well, but you'd be building 1.5 miles of track at an extra station for a service that completely sucks and is essentially useless as airport transit service. So let's leave that be. This unlocks the full potential of the intermodal transit station, and unlike the LAX APM, is building in a comparatively easy environment. You would need a yard for this somewhere, and up here feels like it makes sense. This seems like it'll be a great investment for the airport as its numbers rise. On the county level, I also think around the timing of this phase, they could choose to double-track these sections of the San Bernardino line and commence a full Aero service to the airport, utilizing the shuttle tracks and giving us a one-seat rail ride to San Bernardino and beyond. God knows what year this would be, but maybe by now they're actually electrifying Metrolink, at least the Ventura County, Antelope Valley, Orange County, San Bernardino lines. And we can electrify Aero with EMUs as well. That would allow Brightline West to reach the airport directly. So let's round out this phase by building a separate Brightline West platform. Pulling back, we've now improved to a one-seat express ride from the desert and added a one-seat rail ride to San Bernardino. Phase 3, California high-speed rail, baby. By now, we're in the distant enough future that the San Diego phase may actually be under construction. There are options here, but all would pass through Ontario Airport on, probably at least, new exclusive tracks. The platforms will have already been built in our Phase 2. The junction here would be west of the airport, so direct LA to Vegas trains would bypass the airport, but Vegas to San Diego trains would hit Ontario and would be the service people from the desert would use to reach the airport. As for choosing which San Diego high-speed rail route to go with, I usually draw it along the 10 to the west and the middle route to the east, but I'm going to go with the cheapest route, which is probably State Road 60 and Corona. Lucid Stew's logic for using the 60 to the west in this great video is compelling. You may have noticed a glaring hole remains in serving the catchment area: Riverside. It's tough because a lot of the density here is along this corridor, essentially drawing an arc around Ontario Airport, making it hard to capture a lot of that with a direct connection. But you really would love to get a direct connection to Riverside. The obvious and probably only good way to do it is to use the Riverside line, but the LA subdivision it runs on is at capacity. So what can we do? Well, around this time, although preferably earlier, might be when we finally start to get serious about fixing our regional rail and unwinding it from freight. One of the 2011 suggestions to achieve this involved upgrades to both the LA and Alhambra subdivisions that allow us to make one section of each exclusively for the use of passenger or freight traffic. Now, east of the airport, the Alhambra subdivision kind of needs to be freight, but that does free up the LA subdivision to Riverside to be used for passenger traffic, which is actually ideal. West of the airport, things will probably be flipped. Its suggestion had the switchover at downtown Pomona, but we want the Riverside line, a new beefier Riverside line with real service, to serve Ontario Airport, so that makes things a little trickier because the Ontario mainline tracks are on the Alhambra subdivision. So the solution is to go back to what the 2018 Commuter Rail Phase 2 suggested, essentially, but full-assing instead of half-assing it, meaning the utility here would be massively improved beyond that suggestion, which would have just had existing Riverside line service reach the station. If we build a 4-track switchover between the two subdivisions somewhere east of the airport, Haven was suggested in the 2018 plan, but that might be tricky with 4 tracks. If so, I think this transmission line right-of-way is perfect. You could swap the Alhambra and LA subdivisions east of the airport, add airport platforms on these tracks, which previously would have just been freight and Sunset Limited bypass tracks, and then have the Riverside line serve downtown Ontario, downtown Pomona, construct a new Cal Poly Pomona station, replace the industry station on the LA sub with one on the Alhambra sub, and moving it down here in my plan, potentially serve El Monte with a San Bernardino line transfer, although by now the El Monte station will likely have relocated off of these tracks and over to the Busway station. Well, maybe. We'll get to that near the end. And then at a sunken downtown Alhambra station, probably replacing this public storage facility at Garfield in the trench here, which would be double-tracked before hitting Union. There would need to be an occasional freight train here, but it would be almost entirely passenger, with this route now being almost entirely freight. In addition to the replaced industry station, this decommissions the Montebello Commerce station, meaning it's probably not worth moving it closer to the future E-line if we're going to do this, as is currently planned. But there is still the nearby Commerce station on the Orange County line. All in all, this would be a transformative change. I also think you at least extend the Riverside line to UC Riverside and add an infill station, if not taking over the whole 91 Paris Valley line with an extension at the end. And double track it and
electrify it all.
So if you pull back to the catchment area again, we have Riverside finally served with good service, maybe Paris Valley, more San Gabriel Valley service, and we have direct express links to Union Station, opening up Ontario is a pretty easy option for a ton of LA County, and here, Corona as well, and Marietta, of course. This gets me to my Phase 4. Now, the rail corridor to downtown Pomona. In the studies, there were suggestions of both a light rail conversion of the SPX Purple Line, extending to Cal Poly Pomona, or a DMU, now EMU, Aero extension along the existing mainline tracks. Now, the Aero extension seems to be exceptionally more cost-effective, and I think building a tunnel to Cal Poly Pomona, and also beyond to Mount San Antonio College, makes sense. The only other consideration is this. Now, if we go over to the San Gabriel Valley, Garvey is a very high ridership bus line, and I think the San Gabriel Valley East-West BRT, at least on Garvey, will convert to some kind of rail line at some point in the more distant future. What this will be is tricky. My initial, possibly more
harebrained idea is that you could solve the problems of the California High-Speed Rail San Diego routing, the single-track freeway medium bottlenecking of the San Bernardino line, and the duplication of service between El Monte and Union Station with Metrolink and the El Monte Busway by also wrapping in a D-line heavy rail extension that would probably need a new expensive underground junction just before the B line to a future Arts District station surfaces, and have it come over here underground to pop up and take over the El Monte Busway until here, and somehow have it dip underground and go straight to Garvey. The removal of the busway would also let you double track the San Bernardino line here, and then California High-Speed Rail San Diego route would run over here in a tunnel and take over the rest of the El Monte Busway, also allowing the San Bernardino line to double track. So that would actually get rid of the El Monte Busway entirely, and in this scenario, keep the San Bernardino line El Monte station where it is. Now, I no longer think this is super viable. This would probably not be the cheapest way to get high-speed rail to Ontario Airport. That may be the 60. Or it may be high-speed rail taking over the El Monte Busway this entire way, and quadruple tracking the whole freeway section, just requiring trains to slow down a fair bit where it's very not straight. Quadruple tracking would actually probably require normal car lanes taken in addition to the busway express lanes, so maybe high-speed rail takes the 60 and the San Bernardino line just takes over the busway with a double track, and that's that. I don't know.
I'll remind you, I'm not an engineer, just some asshole on the internet.
The D line is probably not getting this extension for a myriad of reasons, meaning this will all probably be light rail, which could maybe head west with an underground CSU-LA station and surface beside the Alhambra sub if there's room to go to Union, and become a Venice-bound light rail. Or it could turn down Atlantic with an East LA College station and become a branch of the E-Line, although the E-Line already has headways halved by the shared regional connector, so service limit would not be great. And junctioning around where it's going to rebuild and dive underground for the East Side extension would be annoying. I think the Alhambra subversion probably makes sense going to the west. Why all of this talk for a San Gabriel Valley rail, though? Well, if it's converting the BRT, it might want to convert the whole BRT. The initial phase would probably have it below grade or maybe elevated along Garvey and pop up to downtown El Monte, where you could transfer to the BRT eastward for a while. The question is whether it would ever be cost-effective to close this nearly 12-mile gap here with rail. With the reconfigured Riverside line running frequently, honestly, probably not. If you did, you'd want to run it underground, I think to Baldwin Park Medical Center, West Covina, and then Mount San Antonio College, Cal Poly Pomona, and then have it maybe surface at the right-of-way if you can squeeze it in, shifting to Holt after the downtown Pomona station, and shifting it back to the right-of-way, or at least partially elevated over Airport Drive to the airport. So you see, this then creates the question of whether that final Phase 4 of Airport Connecting Transit should be built as an aero extension, an existing mode in San Bernardino that will be a one-seat ride throughout, or light rail, potentially a new mode for them that will be built to LA County standards and possibly become an LA Metro line extension in the future. The light rail would definitely cost a lot more from the beginning, and I'm really having trouble seeing this 12-mile gap getting closed by a rapid metro line when a frequent regional rail route can serve it instead. So this is all to say, here's my thought process on why I'm coming down on the side of this corridor remaining an aero extension, which will affect how we configure the station and the airport, and would, in the end, I think, cause the west end of the San Gabriel Valley BRT to switch up to Valley Boulevard, adding more, admittedly lengthy and slowish, one-seat ride service zones for ONT. Anyway, now, let's back up and take a look at this insane level of transit service with which we've provided Ontario's catchment. This would be one of the best directly connected airports in the country, and would, I believe, drive a level of demand that could push Ontario to such an impressive level of traffic that LAX would truly get some relief. Yes, the Inland Empire is currently a less dense part of the LA metro region, but that will change. We're only getting denser, especially along transit corridors, and by the time we actually get this far into development, which is a long time into the future, there will be higher density. Finally, let's zoom in and take a look at this absolute behemoth of an airport station. Now, this thing is tricky because this is where planners have to be smart and plan backward from what an ultimate build-out looks like to make sure they don't preclude future developments, and it means making some decisions that might cost slightly more now to avoid disasters down the line. I actually don't think anything I proposed here is that far-fetched on a long enough timeline. It's all stuff that's been proposed in transit studies, discounting the San Gabriel Valley LRT conversion that I figure will not actually reach the airport, and the Corona BRT, I guess, which was like my absolute tamest suggestion. So I think planning for these possibilities as eventualities is the wise thing to do. Now, the station wants to be sited here, and the very first thing we're going to want to do is to move this pesky road to give us some room to cook. The first thing for Phase 1 we're going to do is place the Rancho Cucamonga shuttle. I know I said we want to build this second, but it's easier to show it first here in terms of laying out the station. Now, to start, we'll design this as a flying junction coming off of the Metrolink San Bernardino tracks. You can see the grade of the tracks as their outline. Green for at grade, brown for below grade, and then successfully brighter blues for above grade. Remember that we're going to eventually connect the Brightline West tracks to these and electrify them, so we want to leave room for that junction as well. These will travel down Deer and Cucamonga Creek, and we'll want to site the platforms here. Why here, in what currently looks like the middle of nowhere? Well, because we're leaving some crucial room for future tracks. Also, which side do we come in from? Well, it would be cheaper and less disruptive to go in from the west, but we want to go in from the east eventually to continue a future aero service westward. So they could cut costs now and have it go in from the west and safeguard the east route, or they could spend more from the get-go. I'll have it come in from the west for now, but building this up here with a junction that we'll build onto later without disrupting current service, like the C line had before the K line was built. Next, we can separate BRT from the road here and bring it to platforms beside these ones. Over here, we could raise the BRT above grade to cross over without stopping, though you wouldn't need to do this right away if it's cost prohibitive. These platforms are where all airport BRT lines will stop. Next, we're bringing the A line in via Cucamonga Creek, and we'll end it here with a double platform elevated one level above ground level. We're going to now connect these with circulation via the second story, and take an aerial pedestrian path to Terminal 1. Once the international terminal is done, you would be able to do a long walk between terminals from here, which is not ideal, but we'll improve it later. So that's Phase 1. In Phase 2, the San Bernardino line Metrolink tracks get double-tracked, and aero service replaces the shuttle service to the airport, but no actual change at the station. This aero service, to be reliable airport transit, should run at 15-minute intervals at least, ideally closer to 10, as opposed to the 30 or 60-minute headways it has right now. What will change is we're adding a junction between Brightline West and the shuttle, electrifying the shuttle, and adding Brightline West platforms at the airport station, moving the mainline Alhambra subdivision track a little bit to accommodate. Then we also have our people mover. I'm drawing this as an aerial APM starting at the convention center, coming down beside the A-line platforms but one level above for easier circulation. The second story will be our primary circulation story, and then hit each terminal with a station. Let's go ahead and add a fourth terminal here, ending with a station at the rental car facility, and voila. If you really needed to, you can wipe out the rental car facility and make a fifth terminal here by burying Haven, and move the rental car facility to our intermodal station, but the beauty is this station here would work for either, so you don't ever have to add another APM station, even if you need to add another terminal later. Also, now that the APM's here, we can build a rideshare pickup drop-off on the second story here. So that's Phase 2. Phase 3 is where the real fun begins. We're adding high-speed tracks between San Diego and Union, utilizing the high-speed rail platform we built for Brightline West, and we're completely reconfiguring traffic on Union Pacific's mainline rail. So where to start? We're going to make these tracks defunct by bringing this Aero Eastern track to the station now. We're building these as flying junctions around a new double-track mainline here with bypass tracks around the station, and electrifying it all. Building it this way allows the mainline to continue to run as we reconfigure everything. Over to the east, I'm going to make flying junctions here off the LA subdivision and bring 4 tracks into the transmission line right away. The box junction will allow the tracks to cross over each other unimpeded, and then we'll build a new flying junction up here. What happens here depends on which route San Diego high-speed rail takes. If it takes the Corona route, this is the easiest to deal with because we don't need to reconfigure the existing track here beyond doubling it. So let's say it takes the Corona route, as we did before. We can simply double track things here to Turner and build a junction up here with the new tracks. To the west, we take the new double track as far as we can take it, and build a junction here. There's already junctions between the Alhambra and LA subdivisions further down, though they might need to be improved. Scrap the current Montebello Commerce and Industry stations, build new Cal Poly Pomona Industry and Alhambra stations in this direction, and a new UC Riverside station in this direction, along with the extensions at the end, and congratulations, the platforms that once served a shuttle and then Arrow now serve Arrow, a massively improved high-frequency Riverside Metrolink line, and potentially Amtrak service if it's useful for any reason to stop the Sunset Limited here, or if the future Coachella Valley service changes its mind about the routing after these changes take effect, and takes this path instead. Now that the main line is moved here, we can wipe out the former mainline tracks and replace them with the San Diego high-speed rail, also with bypass tracks, connecting to the Brightline West tracks using the platform we built, and adding a new junction to reach Vegas. Phase 3 achieved, our station has now hit its final form, in levels 1, 2, and 3. You can see how it's crucial for the station to be designed in such a way to allow these future developments, making sure there's space for all these tracks and platforms below on level 1, and there's space and support for an APM structure on level 3, and so on. Design the station like a puzzle meant to be built out in the correct order. For Phase 4, Aero service continues down the right-of-way, perhaps with another stop or two, and we bring a new tunnel to Cal Poly Pomona and Mount San Antonio College. And there you have it, one fine intermodal transit facility for an airport on the rise, making it the premium transit-accessible airport in Southern California. Maybe even the country. Suck it, LaGuardia. All of this, of course, is an exercise in determining how Ontario Airport and the transit around it could grow. There's very good reason to think the airport will grow in traffic, but of course that's not guaranteed. Back to bonus aviation sections. In the first video, people protested that in listing SoCal's airports, I failed to acknowledge that Tijuana also gets a good amount of passengers from the San Diego Metro crossing over the Cross Border Express, or CBX, into the airport, which conveniently straddles the border. This is my mea culpa. CBX counts too. Since we last checked in, it seems San Bernardino has added 2 more breeze flights to Provo and Hartford for a total of 4 destinations. 2023 had 52,000 passengers, up from 20,000 passengers. Still a long way to go to hit even Long Beach numbers, but maybe. But San Bernardino has 3 gates and 1 runway. The 3 gates are going to keep it from adding a truly significant amount of traffic in the short term without significant infrastructure upgrades that aren't planned, and the single runway, without space for another, will keep it from being a real force in the long run. I have serious doubts that it could ever rival even Long Beach's current numbers, especially with Ontario likely to majorly expand a short or at least medium hop away. And lots of people have asked about the potential of Palmdale, which currently has no passenger service, but which has flirted with the idea of adding it back. Well, it's got 2 long runways, nothing but space, and is adjacent to the high-speed rail tracks to come, which means you could build an infill station in the terminal, which could potentially make it an attractive option for people coming from the LA area, or the Central Valley, on high-speed rail. But I think it would need that traffic from LA to really make anything but a tiny regional airport make sense, because Palmdale and Lancaster are just not large cities. When it did have passenger service, it was, quote, anemic. Now, there's a feasibility study to build a terminal in the northwest corner of the airport, but it's aiming more in the direction of SBD than any of the 4 non-LAX major LA airports, and certainly not a challenging LAX. So, could it get meaningful traffic from high-speed rail connecting passengers? First, it won't really make sense for Palmdale to have 2 high-speed rail stations, certainly not so close together, so I think they'd have to abandon the city station for the airport, or make an APM connection from the city high-speed rail station to the airport. The former option is bad, frankly, and the latter option will add a few minutes or so of wait and travel time, which is probably fine. Now, the Burbank Airport station to Palmdale will be just a 17-minute ride, which is wild, by the way. Burbank Airport to Union is 7 minutes. You could theoretically get to Palmdale Station from Union on an express train in just 24 minutes, faster than a zero-traffic flyaway bus to LAX. Then add a few-minute transfer and some wait time and so on, you're looking more realistically at like a half hour from Union. Which still sounds good until you remember that it's a 7-minute ride to Burbank Airport, which you will pass on the way, and eventually an 18-minute ride to Ontario Airport, which also has room to expand. Literally anyone taking high-speed rail to Palmdale Airport from the LA Metro can get to Burbank Airport more easily by definition. So what I expect the high-speed rail link to Palmdale will lead to is actually more people traveling from Palmdale down to Burbank for the airport rather than vice versa. In fact, I think high-speed rail has a better chance of thus nixing the Palmdale airport passenger service plans than enabling them. Like San Bernardino, I think Palmdale is destined to be at most a tiny, tiny regional option, not a major player. And that's just one guy's opinion. Feel free to tell me why I'm wrong. And finally, some people have asked about Palm Springs Airport, but I see it as really not drawing in meaningful amounts of people from the LA Metro due to Ontario being closer and likely to offer better service. So it didn't really fit the brief on this series. And I think it's time for me to stop reading airport documents for a hot second. So that's all I've got on the LA Metro Airport series. And if Ontario Airport people are watching, please, Mr. Airport, please do not do the Musk Tunnel. There is still time to right the ship. Be the hero that Ontario Airport and the Inland Empire needs. Thanks for watching. I may need a little break before I drown myself in making another inadvertently massive video, but when I'm back, I'll talk about future planning, Orange County, and whatever shiny thing catches my attention in the meantime.
Squirrel!
Until then.